with public comment on this meeting. And let's see, do I have any? So would anyone like to make a public comment on an item not on this evening's agenda? Seeing none. The next item is the approval of the minutes from our March 23rd meeting.
Go ahead. Second.
There's a motion. Motion by Commissioner Romick, second by Commissioner Pierce. Any other comments on the minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And then we're going to move on to our regular agenda items. The first one is a discussion of the revised alternative transportation expenditure plan performance evaluation. Mr. Engelman.
Good evening, Chair Tatson, and greetings once again. The item before you is regarding a report that was presented to you at your last special meeting, and it is a analysis of the draft transportation expenditure plan. It actually provides you with an analysis of two options. We don't know exactly what the draft expenditure plan is going to look like or what the final expenditure plans look like, but this performance analysis kind of bookends the issue by looking at one alternative that takes a lot of the funds and invests it in transit, and another alternative that invests it in highways. And so we prepared a technical analysis of that. Both alternatives include investments in all types of facilities, and the results of the analysis found generally that the draft TEP would benefit Contra Costa County. So in your last meeting, you received the presentation. I believe it was the meeting before last at the end of March. You received the presentation of the initial draft of the report. That was March 23rd. And we also received several comment letters that we've included in your packet over the past few meetings. And we have, since the March 23rd meeting and since the presentation to you on the PowerPoint slide, we have made some changes to the report. One is we are now showing a more aggressive track towards meeting the governor's long-term greenhouse gas reduction target. So instead of going out to 2040 and then having to really turn on the reductions to make it to the 2050 target, we've drawn a straight line from 2013 out to 2040, and we believe that this is achievable given that with the proposed TEP we would be able to actually accelerate deployment of zero-emission vehicles. We've also incorporated a new graphic from the California Air Resources Board, and this graphic was not in the previous study. It's new figure 5, and it indicates how, according to the Air Resources Board, they expect to get to the 80% reduction that the governor asked for by 2050. And it shows the vehicle penetration of conventional hybrids, plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles, and hydrogen fuel cells. All of these things our proposed TEP would support. And actually, our analysis shows that we would need only a 58% penetration of zero-emission vehicles, while the Air District is saying we need 87%. And we suggested with a 58% penetration plus a 15% reduction in vehicle miles traveled per capita that we could achieve the 2050 goal. The analysis found that by most measures, the draft TEP would benefit Contra Costa, improving on the benefits expected from the 2013 RTP, Planned Bay Area. Both alternatives reduce the share of drive-alone trips and increase the carpool transit and bike ped share, increase average travel speeds and reduce vehicle hours of delay, reduce average trip times, and increase transit use for both low-income and minority communities. So our proposal tonight is that we will respond to the several comment letters to date, and then we would reissue the draft report for public review as shown in your packet. That
Are
concludes
there
my
any
presentation.
questions? Commissioner Taylor.
Yes. Let me ask you this, Martin. Since we've already sent it out, and why would we prolong it as we've pretty much answered everything that has been requested from us?
That's a good question. Well, we could, if you'd like at this point, we could finalize the report. I mean, we're not expecting a whole lot more changes. I think we've answered
pretty much hashed it out, haven't we?
Well, we've answered the questions that we know we can answer, and we're going to respond to those who've commented where we believe that, we're not answering all the transportation questions in the world with this report or with our TEP. So I think at this point, if you wanted to finalize the report, we could do that and have it out there for public use.
I would propose, if I could, I would like to make that motion.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Commissioner Durant.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we had any comments yet from anybody in response to this having been an agendized item? Any new information that's come in?
Well, I do have one comment.
saying
Speaker,
it's
I do have
microphone.
one speaker.
Go ahead.
Okay, now I can speak. We've received a letter from the Sierra Club. Member Durant, we've received a letter from the Sierra Club, and we've received a letter from TransDeaf, from David Schoenbrunn, and we received a couple of emails, one from Peter Leiden, Sierra Club, and we're actually preparing responses to those letters. Those responses are not in your packet, but we do have response letters going out to them, telling them about any changes we made to the report, and that the new report's be available for them.
Okay. This new report that's on our agenda tonight, though, have we had any more feedback from anybody based on what's in here?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of any additional comments that have come in since this was issued.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I have one speaker slip, so let me take that and then come back for commission discussion. Mr. Hoffman. Welcome back, and the microphone's now working.
Thank you.
So you're back to 3 minutes instead of 45.
Ralph Hoffman, Senior Advocate with the Senior Mobility Action Council of our county. There are two options in this. One involves more transit, bicycle, and pedestrian projects, and the other involves more roadway projects. As a senior advocate, we favor the option with more transit, bicycle, and pedestrian projects for these reasons. With members of the baby boomer generation retiring in record numbers, we need to choose the option of more transit, bicycle, and pedestrian projects for senior citizen health and safety. We need to encourage them to stay mobile, yet dump the pump to spare the air and also keep safe. For example, even though most seniors don't ride bicycles, many bicycles are ridden on sidewalks illegally. The police don't have time to give bicyclists a ticket. And what we need are some more protected bike lanes so that the bicyclists feel safer in bike lanes and stay off sidewalks, because seniors have senior falls, and if they get bumped with a bicycle, they're likely, if they don't hear it or see it, they're more likely to fall on the pavement. Yes, buses use streets and highways as well, and we need improvement there. I might mention, since I have a little time left, some breaking news. Chevron is having their annual meeting in San Ramon here on May 25. Sometimes they have it out of state in Texas, so it's on Bollinger Canyon, and this certainly is transportation related. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment on this item? Seeing none, bring it back to the Commission. Commissioner Abelson.
Yes, mine is somewhat a question, going back to, do we need to vote on this now or should we wait? I know that WICTAC has a meeting currently scheduled for next week. And it's Friday of this week, excuse me. I have a meeting every day. So I'm wondering what the impact of taking a vote on this now would be on the receipt of the input from that meeting and any other that might not yet have occurred like that.
Commissioner Peoples, and then Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, this is a question of something you just said, Martin. You said that to reach the governor's goals, we need a 58% increase in zero-emission vehicles, and I think it was a 15% decrease in per capita VMT. Does this TEP lead to a 15% reduction in per capita VMT?
Well, that's something we would need to work on between now and 2050. I don't think we have the solution for that now, but it's something we know that we have to do. It's a 58% penetration, not a 58% increase. 58% penetration.
Okay. Commissioner Taylor.
My question for Janet, or we'll stay with you, Martin. Hasn't this already gone to everybody? In other words, and there was no significant changes, so you've already, I'm presuming, you've already discussed this?
We actually are wanting to consider a change. It's my understanding. Our chair could address that, maybe. I think she's here.
So, Commissioner Pierce.
Yeah, we've already circulated this once. And we've had it discussed here before. We've had a presentation here. We've had questions. We've had responses. This is a minor tweak. And I would ask Martin, what changes, if anything, by recirculating it? I mean, we're giving responses to the letters we've already had. The responses are not going to change, is my understanding. So it seems to me we know where we are. We know what the job is in front of us, what we have to do to accomplish this goal. It seems to me it's better to just accept this report and get on with doing the work we've got to do to meet it.
Okay. Commissioner Abelson.
So assuming that we did what you just said, what I'm wondering is what would be the impact if, say, WICTAC made a change that was to say something different? Would that have an impact on that?
Well,
or
make what kind of change? Are you going to change the analysis?
Change the money, change how we wanted to allocate the dollars.
I think maybe Mr. Engelman can respond to that type of question.
Okay, thank you.
I misunderstood the question. I thought you meant change the analysis in the report.
No.
Let me just be clear. WICTAC is meeting Friday to consider changes to the allocation of funds for the TEP, is what you're meant to say. So this report, as it stands, it actually bookends all of those options with the transit emphasis on one end and the highway emphasis on the other. And the draft TEP is somewhere within that. And so whatever change you make, we clearly know at this point, whatever change you make, it will not change the results of this study. It will not change the position of those bookends. You're not going to go to a higher transit investment than what we've analyzed. You're not going to go to a more highway-intensive alternative than what we've analyzed. So your alternative, whatever changes you make, we believe will fall within these bookends. And I don't think that actually changes the report. It changes your TEP recommendation, but it doesn't change the the alternatives or the results of the analysis in this study.
Okay. I do have another request from Sherry McCoy to speak. Welcome.
Hi, Sherry McCoy. I'm chair of WCTAC. I just wanted to give some clarification as to where WCTAC is. We have a meeting scheduled for April 22nd, and unlike some of the other RTPCs, we actually have a regularly scheduled meeting. We meet once a month. And so we've sort of been a little bit behind on reviewing all the language and all. We focused more on the percentages and things like that. So this meeting on the 22nd was for us to really fully review the draft plan and really give feedback. And we had understood that we had until April 22nd to get our comments in, so we did not readjust our meeting. So I hope that you would give us the opportunity to have that full review and comments by our board before you finalize this particular draft.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I think there's a little confusion here between items on our agenda.
I agree.
Okay, so right now we're talking about the performance valuation. I think your comments are oriented to the next item on the agenda, which is the draft transportation expenditure plan. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Arnrich.
I was going to say what's on our agenda is just to either make changes and recommend this for circulation. That's what's on the agenda. It's not here to approve it. Because we didn't post
I
it
understand. I would like to suggest it's here for action of some kind. It's been circulated once. I'm supporting the motion that says it's time to just accept it, or recommend to staff that we put it on the next agenda for approval if that's what we have to do. But I don't think we need to recirculate it. We don't accomplish anything by doing that. It's not going to change the analysis at all. And I'd like the attorney to weigh in.
I was going to say, I agree with that. I was going to say, just to clarify with Mala what.
Can I have maybe Commissioner Butt and then the attorney speak?
Did I understand that you have some additional comment letters that you said you were going to respond to them, but do we have them?
We have received several comment letters. We've included them in your packets along the way.
They're in this packet, or
they're not in this packet.
We had them at the prior meetings.
so we've seen them all.
You've seen them all.
There
at
are no
prior
new
meetings.
comment letters.
And the comment letters, they're quite strong, actually. They're saying that the TEP is not transformative and that we need to do more to meet the greenhouse gas goal. And we've done all that we can to respond to them in this report. We have them in hand, and we have made all the changes that we can to the report to be responsive to the letters. And now we plan to respond to the commenters with a thank you letter and to tell them that we have issued this new report for their use.
So the report that's in our packet, I think it's dated April 8th,
That's correct.
and it's the one that's in there. Has it been updated from the previous
It has.
reports
It's
we've
been
seen?
updated from the March 16th report. And as I said earlier, we've added a new figure from the California Air Resources Board indicating what would be required to meet the governor's goal in terms of zero-emission vehicle penetrations of 87%.
Have they commented on this?
Air Resources Board? No.
Yeah.
And we've added the straight line to the governor's goal. We've also added some discussion about autonomous vehicles.
Okay. So, maybe it's not relative to the question on the floor, but I just want to note again that, and I'm looking at the table at table 6 on page 19, that what really jumps out at me is that this shows that with our TEP program that the annual emissions are going to drop, but they're only going to drop because of Pavley. So the conclusion I draw from it is that there's nothing in the TEP that is going to, in and of itself, reduce vehicle miles traveled, reduce greenhouse gases, reduce congestion, any of those things, that as far as the greenhouse gas issue goes, it's totally dependent on Pavley. And it's just, I had hoped for something different. I think another problem I have is that the big dollar categories in here, things like Item 7, improve traffic flow and implement high-capacity transit in the I-680 corridor and State Route 24, that's being funded at $250 million, which is the second highest beyond local streets. The projects in here are all kind of lumped together. You know, if you say, look, I want to see something more transformative, then people will say, well, we're going to, you know, it's got, part of the program is we're going to improve transit access and we're going to provide additional routes for transit, and therefore more people are going to use it, and therefore it's transformative. But a big part of it is simply improvements to the freeway to move more traffic, which does exactly the opposite, plus it's growth inducing. And I guess I would feel a lot better if some of these categories were dissected a little bit more to show what part of them is going to be transformative and what part of them is business as usual.
So if I could just comment before we go to the attorney. So with regards to the I-680 project, the recommendation there is to largely implement what came out of the months-long study of I-680 options. And what the committee eventually recommended was something that includes things like bus-on-shoulder operations, which is why you heard about that bill earlier this evening. It includes autonomous vehicles to bring people to bus stations in the Danville, San Ramon area so they can get to BART without driving in single-occupancy vehicles. It includes things like extending the carpool lanes through the 680-24 interchange so you can have more multi-person vehicles. So certainly there was maybe there's going to be more single-occupancy vehicles, but I sense that the money was being allocated to things that were going to encourage all people to take alternatives to single-occupancy vehicles.
Well, I understand they're in there, but there's no indication of how much of it, at least in my opinion, how much of it's for the good stuff and how much of it's for the bad stuff. It's all just thrown in a pot and mixed up. So,
all right. So now we'll go to the Supervanian.
Yes, if you do want to approve this as final as opposed to release it as a draft, I believe you can under the agenda.
Okay.
And Chair Tatson, I have a question. It says the recommendation is to circulate this for public review. So even though the RTPCs have looked at this, is going out to the.
No, I was just saying.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I need more clarification of what you mean. How are you circulating it?
Well, at this point, if you go the direction that your motion proposes, which is finalize the report, we would post it on our website.
Okay.
It would be available for the world to see.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Duran.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to try to bring us back to the item that we're actually on, which is 1.1. So the motion that I heard was not that we circulate this for further comment, whether to the RTPCs or anybody else, but that we as the body who's heard all of the information, seen all of the information, seen the letters before, the only thing we haven't seen from what Mr. Engelman said in response to my earlier question, I'm going to ask him to confirm with a yes or no, is that we have not yet seen the staff responses to those additional letters. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. So that's the only thing we haven't seen. Everything else we have seen. So there's nothing new, nothing nefarious, nothing we haven't seen other than the thank you letters. So with all of that, I would call for the question.
Okay, so I wanted to make I've been holding back a comment, so if I could do that first. I would say the other thing we have not seen are any organization's response to this updated version, which does have some interesting new information in it. And one of the things I was going to suggest that we do, regardless of whether we approve the motion or not, is to consider having staff not only send a letter to these organizations, but also consider meeting with them.
Yeah, I personally don't have a problem with that. Having said that, I'm, this is a public agency. I have a fundamental problem with the notion that a publicly noticed meeting where people have an opportunity to come to us and to speak, and there's nobody here talking about this particular item, is somehow insufficient. I think the fact that it's on the agenda is more than adequate public notice for anybody who wanted to come speak on this item to be here tonight to speak on it. So I don't think there's anything more required on that particular point. Having said that, I'm always in favor of us as an agency having open dialogue with anybody who wants to comment on anything we're doing, but not to hold this up and have it continue to be brought back to us over and over again. We're killing trees, which is not good for the environment every time we reprint these darn things over and over again.
I don't think my suggestion is incompatible with your motion. There's been a call for the question.
Can you repeat the motion?
The motion was to accept the report. Right.
And post it on the
Website, right.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
What does that mean, accept the report?
That we accept it as the final report.
Does it mean approve it and recommend it, or just accept it?
No, we're only on the first item, not the whole TEP
No, I understand.
draft, right?
Yeah.
So it's only about publishing the evaluation of, as Martin said, the bookends. So that when we look at all of the things that are possible within the TEP realm that we've talked about, this is the analysis about the potential impacts, and that's the evaluation. And we're saying rather than keep talking about it, because the evaluation is the evaluation, let's just publish it. It is what it is, and nothing else that we do with the TEP is going to change what's in the evaluation.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay.
Can I just add one caveat that you allow staff to make non-substantive editorial changes to the report if we find a little nitter-nat before we
I assume
publish
that
it.
is encompassed within the motion.
Yes.
And the second.
Thank you.
All right. All of those in favor of the motion. So I haven't had a call for the question. I think under parliamentary rules, I have to take that even if public comment comes in later.
And we've had public comment. It's your pleasure if you want to take
Okay.
this call.
That we can hear it under 1.2.
Yes.
All right. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. So it's unanimous. Thank you. So that does bring us on to item 1.2, which is a review and discussion of various changes incorporated in the draft TEP. This is also going to include an update from the staff and consultant team on the likelihood of successful passage. And if you look at your handouts for this evening, there is a letter that will be referenced. So what I'd like to do is to take the staff and consultant presentations, have a few questions, and then there's an extensive amount of public comment on this, and then I'm going to suggest a way that we discuss it subsequently that will try and keep us on track. Mr. Chittenden.
All right. Thank you, Chair Tatson. Ross Chittenden, Chief Deputy Executive Director here with the authority. And this, as explained by the Chair, this is an action item, and it's really the start of the discussion of what we want the final TEP to look like. Part of the item are what I'd categorize as some housekeeping activities. We're asking you to confirm that the draft TEP that we circulated a few weeks ago accurately reflects the input that you provided at your last meeting, and this is outlined in your staff report. It's specific to the language with BART, the bus and non-rail transit category, the advanced mitigation program, and then the makeup of the Public Oversight Committee. So I would recommend that we review and discuss these changes identified in the packet. And then again, as pointed out by Chair Tatson, once we conclude that, we'll hear a report from Bill Gray of the consultant team's assessment on the draft TEP and some potential changes that you may wish to consider. And you have that letter from Bill in your handout. Before we dive into all that, I'd like to just walk through our remaining schedule over the next month or so. I keep repeating this, but I think it's worth repeating. We meet next on May 4th, and our plan as the staff and consultant team here is that we'll have an updated draft TEP that incorporates basically 3 items. First, we'll address the comments that we've received from the draft TEP. So we've already received some comments from SWAT, from the Paratransit Coordinating Committee, WICTAC's meeting on Friday. We're meeting with EPAC on Friday. So we'll receive a set of comments, and we'll address those comments in whole in the draft TEP that we'll bring back for May 4th. We're also, as we discussed in the last meeting, we're going to be, and actually it's our next agenda item, we're going to be soliciting your input on what kind of format you'd like in the TEP, so that'll come back. And then the third item that we'll incorporate in this May 4th revision or any directions that we get from you here tonight. So we'll be consolidating all that into a packet for May 4th, and I'd recommend that be the primary purpose of the May 4th meeting, is to really reintroduce all the assembled material with all the comments that we've received, and really get your review on that. Again, we have 3 special meetings scheduled in May. The May 4th meeting I just mentioned, May 11th, May 18th. May 11th, I see that as really kind of a fine-tuning, tweaking based on what we do on May 4th. Hopefully we have everything addressed. And May 18th really is the crescendo of where we come back together and say that we've captured all the input from our stakeholders and the direction that we've received here from the board. So that's really the outline over the next month. Subsequent to that, we'd be seeking approval from cities and the county, working towards adopting the TEP and an ordinance in July, and asking the Board of Supervisors to put it on the ballot for November. So getting back to tonight's discussion, again, I'd like to just quickly highlight what's in your packet before we get to Bill's comments. The major sections are BART, and the primary revisions to BART was to put the use of funding for the BART cars and advanced train control as the primary purpose, and then to make the conditions more clear and transparent. And third thing that we changed in there that came out of our discussion last meeting was to declare an intent that in case the BART cars, a regional solution for BART cars is not met, we still have the need to move people around, so we would focus on alternate transit that serves the same corridor. So ultimately, the objective of this category is to provide more transit along the BART corridors, preferably on BART cars, and if we can on BART cars in some other method. So that's how I would like you to interpret that section. A few minor changes were made to Category 11, bus and non-transit. That's primarily to address some of the comments that we received from Commissioner Abelson. The advanced mitigation program has been significantly reworded and actually restructured. The language or the intent of the language there is that we're committing the authority to participate in an advanced mitigation program, assuming that certain conditions are met, and those conditions are outlined in the language. We need to have the various assessments, the mitigation strategies, and an assessment of project impacts and estimated costs. And you'll be able to review all of that before we make a final decision to participate. If we do participate, the funding for the advanced mitigation would be from the project categories, similar to if we had mitigate on a case-by-case basis over time. So it's really taking the same funding that we'd spend in the future for mitigation and bringing it forward for the advanced mitigation. And then the last significant change was to the Public Oversight Committee, and that was discussed at our meeting on April 6th. So that's all outlined in the staff report. We've also incorporated or included a copy of the draft TEP in a final version, as well as a track change version. There are a few other edits that are in the track change version that you may see. I think the biggest one I'd like to call out, and it really remains an outstanding issue, is in implementing guidelines number 9, the maintenance of effort. We've incorporated some updates based on our last meeting. We're continuing to get comments on that, so we're working primarily with a group of out of PMA to find language that's acceptable And this is really towards some of the cities that have committed significant amounts of general fund money or other discretionary funds over time to make sure that they're not penalized for smart actions or good actions they've taken over the last few years to make sure they're taking care of their transportation investments in those cities. So confident that we'll be able to work out acceptable language on that. So again, I'd like to reiterate that we have comments from SWAT, Paratransit Coordinating Committee. We expect some more comments. I'd like to get your concurrence that what we've included in the packet here reflects your direction from April 6th, and then commit that we'll bring back the May 4th version with any additional comments received. So, Chair, I'd recommend we chat briefly about that, because I think when we get into Bill's discussion, we'll probably have a lot more substantial discussions.
We also have public comment, and I'd also like to take the public comment all at once after they've had a chance to hear Bill's presentation. So what I was going to suggest is that we have Bill make his presentation.
I've got a question first before you can do
Okay,
that.
well, we can hang on. I'll recognize him. And then we get public comment, and then we come back and we break our discussion into categories. Commissioner Mitchoff.
Thank you. This is a question. It's not a comment. I'm on page 1.245, and it goes to the BART issue. And I guess I just need clarification. This would be the language, and I know we talked about the wordsmiths getting together to make this easily understandable, but my recollection from our discussion 2 weeks ago was that we had a specific time frame, which you've included in here, that the money had to be spent by for trains and the attendant switching or crossing or system. Thank you, train control system. The way this is written, and maybe it's just it says this category is intended to provide funding to increase the capacity and ridership of public transit on the BART corridors and for BART station access and parking improvements. My recollection is that we wanted that money saved just for BART trains so that we didn't start petering it away on other things until we knew whether our partners, colleagues in other counties and the MTC, depending on election cycles, were going to be able to pony up their share. And the way it's written, and maybe it's just me again, is that this allows for the possibility of using those dollars before 2026 for BART stations, access, and parking improvements. Am I the only one reading it that way?
So my own, I think you could read it the way you are. I know SWAT had other comments that we don't want to get in. I'm not going to bring up now. So I think staff, we just probably take that comment, can come back in another
that's fine.
version. But
that was my understanding from our discussion last week, that we did not want any of the money, if this measure passes, to be spent on anything other than trains and the control system until we knew that the other money wasn't coming through, and then it could be used for other things.
Okay, so then in questions, Commissioner Abelson,
Well,
and then
I just had an answer to what
Commissioner
you're
Pierce.
saying. I've participated in a number of meetings where BART talks about access and parking, and the thing is, if there are more riders, they need to be able to get up the staircases, they need to be able to park their car, and I think that's what this is referring to.
Well, that's my concern, Janet. I thought that that should be a BART expense. From my perspective, that should not be coming out of the TEP, because if you start spending money on those things, if you don't have new cars, then there's not going to be money there for the cars when we need it.
Well,
okay, so I do think that we had settled this at the last meeting. I think Commissioner Mitchoff is correctly interpreting the preference of the authority at that meeting. Another opportunity for a bit of rewording. Commissioner Pierce.
Yeah, and it's not so much a question, but it's actually something I'd like the public to be able to hear before they make their comments, because I think there's one other condition we need to put in here on the BART cars issue. I think the concern that I have is to make sure that BART maintains the use of their fare box money for physical infrastructure for the capital, and that this money cannot supplant that, and they must maintain the same diversion. We hear, and I heard it at my own council last night, what if they get this money from CCTA and then they're going to spend it on paychecks? And I said, that's not our intent. Well, how have you guaranteed that they can't spend it on salaries and stuff like that? And I said, well, then we need a maintenance of effort phrase in here somehow. And I think that can be done. I think we need to say that the same level of use of fare box recovery for physical infrastructure, capital infrastructure, needs to remain, or this money is not available.
Okay, Commissioner Murray and then Commissioner Durant.
I actually was just nodding my head. That's
Okay.
my understanding also.
Okay,
So it's
okay.
fine.
Very good. Commissioner
And
Durant.
what Karen said was fine
Right.
too.
Thanks. I echo those comments. The only additional, I think the easiest way for me to say this is I was sort of bouncing this language around myself is I think we're still missing one critical component from this that I thought we had concurrence on, which is that the funds in this category are primarily intended to be allocated to cars and the associated advanced train control systems, and we have the word may in there in the very beginning of it. Third line down, and I'm on page 1.2-3. And so rather than funds in this category may be allocated, I think I think there was a consensus that should say something like are primarily intended to be allocated, and then you amplify that with the rest of the paragraph as it is now, right? That if it's not used for that category, then you can use it for the other things. The second component of it that I thought we had consensus on was not just that the approach be developed by December 31st, 2016, but that it be developed and approved by each of the other bodies so that there's a clear funding source by that date.
2026.
By 2026. Did I say
okay.
2016? Sorry. Yeah, by December 31st. Yeah. So for clarity there, I think the consensus would be captured with the phrases developed and approved as opposed to just and developed. And I think that would capture the consensus that we had at the last meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so what I'd like to do now is, because we're sort of moving into the conversation I wanted to have after we have public comment, is to receive Mr. Gray's report, take public comment, and then bring it back for authority discussion. Welcome.
Thank you. What I'm going to be going through tonight is the memorandum on our letterhead, Graybo and Scott, and it's in your packet as an attachment, or not in your packet, but on your dais as an attachment. And I'm going to walk through this because it suggests a number of changes we think are consistent with what the regional committees have asked for, but provides some better balance countywide and addresses or attempts to address a lot of the input from the various stakeholders over the last few months. And our office, you recall at the end of the last meeting, you asked our office, our team, if you will, to provide your board with recommendations related to changes or modifications that might improve public support for the transportation expenditure plan as it relates to a possible ballot measure. And all of this is in the context of our overarching approach, which is a consensus-based plan as much as possible. We processed in our office with our team and lots of discussions with staff about all of the input we've gotten, and I just want to echo the fact that we've gotten a lot of public opinion surveys, we had focus groups, we had public meetings, telephone town halls, a lot of stuff like that. So let me just start by first of all saying that our overarching recommendation is that we now look at a 30-year term for a measure as opposed to a 25-year term, and that's because a number of the comments, primarily from the business community, but a few the public outcry, if you will, on 680, for example, overwhelmingly in just about all of the public outreach, the polling, and everything else we did, the public is suggesting, demanding, if you will, that we deal with the 680 corridor. So we're in order to do that in a significant way without proposing other radical changes, which would not have been easy to talk about, we're suggesting you basically increase the size of the pie a little bit, go from a 25-year measure to a 30-year measure, What that means is that instead of a $2.34 billion measure, it looks like a $2.87 billion measure. So, and I'll go through this because there's some charts attached to our memo that reflect what this would look like, the measure would look like if we went to a 30-year measure, and how it's allocated and what the changes are in the various programs. But first and foremost is a recommendation to increase the allocation on the 680 corridor to a total of $250 million. That's between both the Central County and the SWAT region. That's the biggest dollar change, delta. Secondly, we recommend additional funding to improve the commutes on the I-80 corridor. That's also very important, and WICTAC has spent a lot of time and energy on their high-capacity transit study on the I-80 corridor. With the additional capacity, we can make the total, and this is between both the interchange improvements that they talked about and the high-capacity transit study. There's $115 million available for that corridor. Now, one of the things that WICTAC did, and we have a bit of a concern about, is they split out the interchange improvements as a separate project and then wound up with a relatively small amount of money for the high-capacity transit study. We acknowledge this. We understand why they did that, but we think for the TEP that goes to the voters, the focus should be a large amount of money on the I-80 corridor. That being said, we want to acknowledge, and the TEP should reflect that the interchange improvements are eligible for funding and are a priority for WICTAC. So it's not that we're changing their ability to build that project in any way. It's really to make it a more attractive proposal for the public. And then the last recommendation related to the large projects and corridors, if you will, is the 240-24 corridor. And shifting to a 30-year measure provides additional capacity to increase funding along this important corridor as well. And one thing I would say is that as we put this together and worked with staff and looked at the needs as opposed to the various asks, the 4 corridor and 680 North in particular are areas that need a lot of attention. Some of the congestion we're experiencing on 680 that impacts the San Ramon Valley is basically as a result of some choke points on 680 North as you get into Walnut Creek. So it is clearly one corridor that needs to be looked at together. And your staff is looking at it. There's a lot of projects moving forward, and Ross can talk about some of those, but it's an important corridor. So that's the bulk of the recommendations relative to the corridor. Now, in terms of programs, there are 2 programs that we've had a lot of testimony over the last few months on, and a lot of attention on the seniors and people with disabilities category, and the bike ped category. We're recommending that you increase the allocation to both of those to a 4% of the total measure size, and that it's a bit of an increase. In the prior version, we had 3.3 for the seniors and people with disabilities. This goes to 4%, so it provides more. And then what we also did with that corridor or that category is better balance the allocation countywide. We observed that some of the RTPC requests had some relatively low numbers on a regional basis, and so what we tried to do was, and what we did is actually hold all the RTPC requests as a minimum, but then allocated some of this new money, if you will, to balance that program on a countywide basis. And in particular, SWAT, for example, we suggested a fairly significant increase on the senior and disability program, and then in East County, same thing with the PED bike program. And our overriding thought here is it's important to provide a balanced program and not, the TEP as it's out on the street now, if you look at some of those allocations, they just appear low. They're single-digit numbers instead of double-digit numbers. And I realize that's not a very scientific way, but it's how people would look at this. So these are important programs. They're strongly supported in all of the public outreach and the polling and everything else. So we think that it's important to allocate a little bit of additional money to that. One of the more, probably the only significant recommendation related to cut is with the CDI well, I call it CDI, but it's really called the Community Development Transportation Program. I missed the fact that we changed the name of it as we were developing, but that's the program that is now called Community Development Transportation Program. And that program didn't get a lot of, well, first of all, we recommend that you, instead of allocating 6% to that program, we allocate 3% to that program, and then take the money that frees up, if you will, and focus it on the Major Roads and Streets program, or the Complete Streets program. Again, with a focus on trying to better balance the allocations countywide. Again, with the overarching thing is to maintain the RTPC requests per subregion. And an example is Central County in the current version that's out on the street had a significant amount of the total major roads and streets. So we held that number and then allocated to all of the other regions this major road money. And in Central County, we used that additional money to fund additional improvements on the 242 and Highway 4 corridors. So that's kind of where it went. So anyway, that's the programs, and really related to that is, and there's quite a bit of discussion on a number of programs. Probably the most significant is this Community Development Transportation Program, which is now we recommend that you consider a 3% total allocation to that. But somewhat radically, we suggest that you look at that in the context of your current Measure J TLC program, which if you go back and look at Measure J, a lot of the same purposes were there. That was more on the housing side. It was to encourage transportation infrastructure, to encourage infill development and housing. And your jurisdictions have all started to implement some of those programs. The CDI, or CDT, I guess it is really, that program, a lot of the comments we received from stakeholders focused on the job creation. So what we see is an opportunity to kind of combine these two programs, and for your authority over the, and we're not naive enough to think that we can, in the next 3 weeks, solve all of this. So what we're really suggesting is that we modify the TEP slightly to make 3% and then charge your authority in the TEP within the first 12 months of the measure to, in effect, redefine this program. Or not even, I don't want to say redefine, it's to look at your current program and amongst yourselves with your staff and the PMA and those who have had comments about these two programs, look at that as a merged program, because that provides a significant amount of money for jobs and housing and for infrastructure that would support those kind of things. And for example, dealing with the Northern Waterfront, dealing with some of these projects, that gives you a pot of money that you could work with. One example of a good opportunity there is this State Strategic Growth Council Affordable Housing Program. Funds from this program could be made available to local jurisdictions as match money. That's almost a, this is my words, but it's almost a no-brainer because the state is trying to focus and encourage local jurisdictions through this program to consider affordable housing projects. And one of the issues in a lot of cases is match. And so this gives you an opportunity to have a source. But again, this would be a program that you would need to define and adopt within 12 months of the passage. So we're basically setting it aside, setting some goals and objectives. So that's the major change. Now the rest of this is a number of, I guess, responses to various comments we've had over the last few months that I thought it was appropriate to respond to, and in particular a couple letters that were made available to you just prior to the last meeting and one at the meeting. There was a number of suggestions about conditioning a portion of the funding proposed to be allocated to jurisdictions for local street and road maintenance, basically the return to source, and allocate those dollars based on housing units permitted over some period of time. Our team doesn't recommend that approach, but as noted, as I just talked about, we recommend the focus more on a new CDI program or community transportation program, and possibly rethinking or relooking at or reconsidering your TLC program and combining the two. A number of stakeholders suggested inclusion of meaningful performance criteria to screen projects. And we do agree with the idea, the concept of that, and it's in the draft now. We believe that should apply to any project over $25 million. And the TEP should, again, this is another one that I think it's important that your authority commit to within the first year or so of this new measure, having hearings, having discussions with the stakeholders, and adopting some performance criteria. And my words are, this is just good public policy to basically have a discussion about what the impacts of these projects, and particularly when you're on some of these corridors where you're selecting alternatives amongst 2 or 3 or 4 options, to publicize and make the public aware of the impacts of these various options. It's basically a more detailed look at the performance criteria than Martin just went through. Again, this would be in the informational side, not in a threshold side. In other words, some of the requests we've had would be that this be used to define whether or not you could build a project. Our recommendation is that it's more of the sunshine. You're gonna, as good public policy, disclose the impacts of the various alternatives, have a discussion, and make a decision based on that. That's the performance criteria. The urban limit line, there's been a lot of discussion at your board. We recommend that the language that you've basically adopted and included in the draft is sufficient. We don't recommend any changes to that, but we would recommend you consider removing that cap on the number of non-voter approved amendments over a period of time. The feedback we've gotten from various stakeholders is that they see more downside than upside to including that. I realize that was an effort by your authority to respond. It just didn't resonate. So I think other than that, though, we recommend that the language that you've worked on and crafted and it's in the draft remain. There's been a lot of discussion about agricultural lands. Our recommendation would be that, and we worked on this very carefully, on when a jurisdiction is considering a non-voter approved amendment to their urban limit line that would impact defined agricultural lands. And I've come to understand that there are definitions of agricultural lands, and I didn't have that available, but that's the idea here, is that if it impacts a defined ag land, then you would ask that agency adopt either an ag protection ordinance and or agree to mitigate the loss of designated ag lands. So that's only for lands outside of the urban limit line. With respect to the growth management program, we do, and we've talked about this before, and this is a little contrary to some direction we've heard from you before, but we do recommend that you add some additional disclosure items, not requirements, to your growth management checklist to just indicate whether or not a jurisdiction has adopted, and there's a list here of any or all of the following. And quite honestly, this is a list right out of the community vision document. It's just, it seems to me that it is, or our team, that it's good public policy to just disclose whether you have this. And I realize that I've heard the arguments pro and con, that everybody already has access to knowing whether or not this exists, but it just seems like it's a relatively straightforward process. The 13 on this list, this is on page 3, basically is recommending responding to some of the labor comments that you establish policies regarding payment of prevailing wages, which is already required on all public works projects, but have apprenticeship programs where they're appropriate, and consider adoption of a helmets to hard hats program as a part of your just normal process. And then lastly, a number of the comments that we've heard over time related to the need for a more comprehensive vision on the statement, or on the TEP. And we've heard this from a variety of different sources. And so what our recommendation is a part of our task to work on the format is to take the information that you've already done a lot in terms of laying out goals and objectives and visions, but we let our communications people kind of craft something for your consideration that would in effect be the introduction to the TEP. And with that, I know there's a lot of information in here. The attachment, there's a couple tables. I think I'd call your attention to the very last one. It's one with some lines through it. There it is. Thank you. It's up on the screen. And it shows basically those areas that we're changing the allocations to. The yellow highlighted are the projects or programs that basically have more money going to them, and overarching, and then the salmon colored is community transportation, community development transportation program, I want to say it the right way, is that we're suggesting you reduce it from 6 to 3%. But other than that, that's basically our recommendations. We'd be glad to answer any questions. Again, our recommendation here is that consistent with what Ross was talking about, that some or all of these, we would recommend you just direct us to include it in the May 4th draft, effectively for your consideration. So what we're interested in tonight is if we've missed anything, we overreached, we suggested something that isn't appropriate. But we think this all would make this measure easier to read, easier to understand, more consistent countywide, and it responds as much as we thought we could to a lot of the comments we've been receiving or your authority's been receiving over the last few months.
Great. Thank you. What I'd like to do is take public comment, and then we'll bring it back and discuss. So we have several speakers, and we'll at least ask each of you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Della Acosta, who will be followed by Brian Corey. Welcome.
So my name is Della Acosta. I'm here representing Bike Concord. And I first want to say that the Contra Costa residents of Bike Concord have really appreciated the opportunities to give input throughout this whole process. But we are disappointed with the results so far. The current numbers and the ones that are in the one that was published, not reflecting today's report that he just gave, they treat bicycling as a marginal part of our transportation system, and they're incompatible with the state goals for active transportation and VMT reduction. And to be honest, they threw away the biggest opportunity that we have to set Contra Costa County on a path for a healthy, sustainable, and equitable future. I do want to say that I'm a city planning consultant, and Caltrans is committed to triple bicycling by 2020, which is only 4 years away. We all know that. And there was a question here on how to reach the 15% reduction that the state's requiring, and I'm currently working on that with cities that I work with, and it can be done. But I can tell you that with less than 5% of funding, which is what we're asking, it cannot adequately cover, and I would like to hear a comment on if you have any ideas on how less than 5% could adequately cover the state and local requirements for active transportation, for VMT reduction, the Plan B area requirements, and the MTC performance targets.
Thank you. We'll make our comments later. All right. Brian Corey will be followed by Cynthia Armour, and then Mr. Adams.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the authority for allowing me to speak. I am also with Bike Concord, and I have a very basic message, and that is that the Bike Concord organization will not get behind the TEP as it's presently put forward. The 2.9% is not adequate. On May 5th, we have a presentation of a master plan that's going to be presented to the city. We're hoping to move forward with that. This is not just a Bike Concord issue or a City of Concord issue. All of Contra Costa County will benefit by having a bike and pedestrian plan that will allow people to get to transportation. Transportation, I believe, is going to be able to be what the authority can use as a way of achieving the 15% reduction in greenhouse gas. It can't be done if you look at the highways and how they are working right now. A large percentage of the vehicles that are clogging the highways have single people in these vehicles. I'm working on a project in San Francisco. I use public transportation. I ride a bike from my home to the public transportation that I take to San Francisco. The employer was smart enough to give incentives to the employees for people that use public transportation, not so much the bicycling. And I'm thinking that they're doing it probably to have lead money come to them for a tax incentive. The Transit Authority, I believe, could utilize major employers to help reduce the amount of people that are driving in cars by themselves. That, and with a master plan that's properly funded, we'll be able to move forward and achieve the goals that the governor has placed upon you to solve. Thank you very much for my comments.
Thank you.
My comments.
Cynthia Armour, followed by Seth Adams, and then Cheryl Brown. Welcome.
Good evening. I am Cynthia Armour. I'm here with Bike East Bay. We want to let you know that in its current state, we will not be supporting Measure J, and we do not believe the voters will either. At your last meeting, we pointed out that the East County has barely 1% of funds allocated for bike ped projects, and nothing has changed. We join many other organizations tonight, some who have been left out of the process, and others who see too many business-as-usual projects in the plan. We are still committed to the process, but the cities cannot continue to control every key decision point. There are numerous other stakeholders needed to pass this measure, and they are not getting sufficient recognition and opportunity for meaningful input at the RTPCs. What needs to change in order for Bike East Bay to support this measure, or a new Measure J, are 5% dedicated funding for bike ped projects in each area of the county, to make the Major Streets and Complete Streets program a competitive program with balanced funding in each RTPC, and for categories of projects such as the freeway corridors and the Complete Streets program to include strong performance criteria that awards funds for projects that give commuters alternatives to driving alone. So, and I know that this letter that just came out this afternoon addresses some of those, and we are encouraged by seeing that. We do think that there are some policies that could go further, in particular policy number 9 regarding the performance criteria. Having a $25 million limit, for example, would be one issue, and also having this be just something that informs the public and doesn't actually have any opportunities for better decision-making would be an issue. I do want to thank you for the needed money that you have allocated to date for our projects, and I want to thank very much staff and consultants for their hard work on what is one of the better Complete Streets policies that we have seen. Please keep that. But as we have said, bike networks are not built as an afterthought to congestion relief projects and roadway repaving. They're not side projects. They need to be the main dish. That's business as usual. Our projects need their own dedicated funding source. I hope you will turn the ship in a different direction to bring all groups on board, and if you do, we will be there with you. We'll be on the campaign trail. We'll be knocking on people's doors and getting them to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seth Adams, followed by Cheryl Brown, and then Ron Brown.
Members of the authority, I'm Seth Adams, the Land Conservation Director for Save Mount Diablo, and I'm commenting tonight not so much on the specifics, but on the overall process and plan, because Save Mount Diablo is so concerned about the current state of the proposed TEP and the additional new sales tax. We've worked closely with CCTA for many years, and we counted Measure J as a significant step forward, in large part because of its policy improvements, such as voter-approved urban limit lines, as well as the marquee projects such as the Caldecott Tunnel that were widely supported and helped reduce congestion around the area. As with Measure J, when we help facilitate collaboration between many of our allies who might otherwise have opposed the measure, we've engaged at every level of the current CTP and TEP process, from testimony here, individual conversations with authority members, membership in the EPAC, Ron Brown's efforts with a small group, and consultants to try and find common ground. We've done significant research. We've submitted thoughtful policy recommendations. We've helped coordinate a coalition of environmental, labor, and transportation advocacy organizations and work with the public. We were told that the expenditure plan would be preceded by an adopted countywide plan and an EIR which would review impacts. When the CTP and the EIR were delayed, several of our coalition members weren't willing to continue and are already opposed to this measure. We were willing to continue conversations and collaborations to see if an expenditure plan could be developed that was positive and transformative with wide support in the community. We hoped a good plan would be developed which we could support and which we might change our opponents' minds on. In our opinion, this TEP is not such a plan, and it clearly fails in part because not enough time has been taken in developing the underlying countywide transportation plan and in evaluating its projects, policies, and programs, both in terms of priority and cost effectiveness and in terms of environmental impact. Our board is waiting for a more final document to consider, but at this point, staff's recommendation would not be positive. We believe this TEP will set a bad direction for a generation that will be proven short-sighted in just a few years as state policy advances, and a bad direction legally as several court cases play out. It's not just our quite pragmatic organization which is concerned. We just had the first of several coalition meetings in which we were taking the temperature of the members, many of whom also sit on the EPAC. Every participating member indicated that they were not satisfied with the expenditure plan and that they could not recommend supporting it. Most of them indicated that they would recommend opposing it. A coordinated opposition campaign is already being discussed, and we know that several organizations are already considering a legal challenge. The expenditure plan and the proposed sales tax are premature. There's no widespread consensus. Maybe that's because the current tax will be ongoing for another 17 years. In 2004, you asked the public to approve a sales tax for 25 years, and now before the first one is completed or expires, you're asking the public to double the tax. Maybe it takes a deadline of a funding source expiring to reach actual collaboration.
So if I could ask you to wrap up your comments because of the
last
buzzer.
2 sentences. If actual consensus can't be achieved and time is getting very short, we recommend taking the time to develop the missing countywide transportation plan and the supporting environmental review, and instead propose this measure in 2 or 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl Brown, and then Ron Brown, and then Judy Barrientos.
Good evening, Commissioners. I serve as the Central Labor Council alternate on the EPAC. And since last May, or June was our first meeting, I've gone to a bunch of meetings where we've done all sorts of processes and had input, some of which I see a little bit of tonight in Mr. Gray's memo. It's been a long time, and the Labor Council is one of those groups that Seth mentioned that if we looked at TEP version 2.2, it would be really, really hard for us to get behind it. The conversations that need to happen with non-construction labor haven't happened sufficiently. These are the workers that use the transportation system and the workers that run the transit and transportation system. We haven't had the deep conversations about what jobs in this community are going to look like in 30 years now, not just 25 years, but 30 years. There are big changes coming, and we don't want to be woe-nelly people here. We want to sit down with the consultants, with staff, with commissioners, to really talk through what is our community going to look like, what is work going to look like, what's the role of workers in the transportation sector going to look like, what are good jobs going to be in this county for the duration of the sales tax. This is a generation, and I don't think 3 weeks is enough to have those conversations. I think we really need to hear the concerns of transit riders, of which, I work for a union, AFSCME. We have lots of county employees that can't afford cars and face huge, long commutes taking public transit. So we still need to see a commitment to increasing time for bus service. But we also need to sit down and really hash through what this county is going to look like for jobs in the future. So, we think considering putting something on the ballot in 2018 or 2020 may allow for conversations that we would like to participate in. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ron Brown, and then Judy Barrientos. And right now is my last speaker slip on this item, so if someone else would like to speak, if you could fill out a slip. Welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. I was going to speak on late, I guess, on item 1.1 when a comment was made that, I guess there was nobody who wanted to comment on it, so there must not be any feelings or thoughts from the public. And that's when I kind of jumped up and wanted to make a comment, because we've been commenting on that issue for months. We've been talking about what kind of performance evaluation should be involved, what kind of performance evaluation this measure should have included in it. And we've pointed out to the consultants, to the members of the authority, to the staff, ideas and suggestions that aren't represented in the plan that you looked at and approved this evening. We have no problem with it being made public and generating additional comments, but I did take exception with the fact that we would have needed to stand up again and reiterate the comments we've made before, both written and verbal at this venue, for which we have not received response. And so I just wanted to be clear about that. I didn't think we needed to make them again, but then to have it called out that nobody seemed to have a comment to make did cause me to want to speak. On item 1.2, I just want to indicate that it's kind of interesting. We're right here at John Muir's birthday, Earth Day time of the year, and one of his quotes is, when you pick out anything by itself, you will find that it is connected to everything else in the universe. And what we've been talking about in this entire measure is putting together an entire package and an entire program that works not only for the economy, but for the environment and for everybody. It's the three legs of the stool we've been trying to address. And so some of the things that we saw late this afternoon in the new edition that Bill Gray's team put out may be items that, if you look at them, do begin to address to a certain degree some of the items we've been talking about and wanting to call attention to, but they're connected to everything else. They've got to be in an entire package. And that entire package is missing some really critical things that we've talked about before. The county transportation plan, well, that's water under the bridge. But we've talked about having some kind of vision. What are we trying to do with this? And performance evaluation, so we really can track what we're trying to get done. And so the last item on Bill Gray's document today, item number 17, 14, whatever it was, the very last item was, oh yeah, some people have asked for us to have a vision and some goals that we should be shooting for. And I think that's the epitome of what problem we have tonight. We're standing upside down. The vision should have been first, because you can create anything you want to create, and then you're going to tag a vision on at the very end and hope that that's going to work. Well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, and unfortunately, I think that's the path we're on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I would comment that it struck me that when we started this set of special meetings, we discussed some of the vision and goals that the authority had adopted.
Let's hear all of the comments.
Right.
If you want to comment,
Right.
we all want
Right.
to.
So that was Judy Barrientos. Yes. Excuse me? Oh, okay. It was listed as 1.3, so I'm sorry. I'll call you next. So if there's anyone else who would like to speak after Mr. Brickley, happy to have you come up. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Judy Variantos, and thank you for letting me speak. I'm actually an ATU president for transit in Contra Costa County, County Connection, but I'm also actually a citizen. I live in Antioch. My son goes to Clean Valley Charter High School, so I do travel the roads, the freeways, and everywhere else, nonetheless in a bus, but also for sports events and things for my child. And looking at this, and I look at the numbers, and I'm wondering, how we're going to get people out of cars and into transit. If we continue to put a lot of money into roads and things, we're not working on transit and getting more transit out there for people to take. It's hard to take transit when a bus comes every hour. You got to get to work. You can't get to work and say, I got to leave at 7. My son can't take the bus because he would have to take the bus and get to school an hour and a half early. And he'd have to sit around. But if he takes the next bus, he's late for school. So then in the end, I have to take him to school. So these services that are out there are not very efficient for people to get around. I also know at County Connection in 2009, we had a layoff. We laid off 29 drivers. We took 76,000 hours out of the system, and they haven't replaced it. It hasn't been increased. It hasn't been changed. We haven't created new service. We haven't done anything to make it better so people can get out of their cars and into buses and into non-rail systems. And whenever I hear the news stories about BART's, full, it can't put anybody else on the BART, then what are we doing to get people county to county? I know Golden Gate up there, they send buses down the freeway into San Francisco and they get people there. We can do the same thing in Contra Costa County, getting them down to other areas. And my other concern is jobs. When I hear about these things that are going to happen in the future, what are going to happen to the jobs? What is going to be the vision of jobs? It seems like there's not going to be any. But for a blue-collar worker that does not have the ability to do technology. I took 3 computer classes trying to learn computer grammar. I failed them every single time. So I'm not going to be a computer grammar in the future. So I really am concerned about that. But I really am wanting you guys to put more money into transit, into buses, into other things that can get people around so that they will not have to be in their cars and we can give them the services and make it frequent so that we don't have to wait on the side of the road in the rain with nothing to protect us. So people don't want to be out there doing that. They rather get in the cars because it's easier and faster. And if we make transit better, it would be easier and faster. They could get out of their cars, then they could travel the system, and it would be efficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brickley? And then do you want to speak on item 1.3 as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome.
It's a little confusing. My name is Tom Brickley. I represent tonight Greenbelt Alliance. We have been participants in the EPAC meetings from the beginning. Primarily, we've been involved trying to take a look at the bigger pictures. Primarily, we were very optimistic that the words like transformative were being used. And we pay attention to the whole Bay Area, the state and the region, what's going on. And we saw this as a golden opportunity for you commissioners to actually be transformative. We joined the group enthusiastically and look forward to creating a transformative TEP. I think all I need to say is that we agree wholeheartedly with Save Mount Diablo. We think Seth and Ron have explained this and articulated very clearly to you. I think it's surprising. We have been working on this for a year, and yet it's only tonight that we first hear the language that we've been trying to get into this document from the beginning. I'm a little bit cynical to have it appear this time, at this juncture. It sounds like lip service. And I think that Contra Costa needs to do a lot better. I think you need to listen to Save Mount Diablo. I think you need to hear what we hear. I don't think you're hearing it, because I get the version 2.2 is a status quo. You guys hit a home run. You built the tunnel. It's pretty easy to pull that plan off the shelf and say, let's do it again. But I think right now we are at an incredible juncture, and if you don't take to heart the word transformative, groups like ours are not going to continue along with the planning, and we probably will also go into opposition. And I think that's something to seriously think about. Why create opposition when you had partners? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have another speaker slip, Joe Sabrante? And if anyone else would like to speak, please complete a speaker slip and bring it up to staff. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Tatz. And just very quickly, I would, in looking at the revised version that I've just seen just a short time ago, I would say I'd like to have more money in every category. I'd love to especially target the return to source money that we've been talking about every time I come up here. And just a reminder that your RTPCs and your cities all gather together and have been hoping to get 28 to 30%, and it's down to 23. I guess where I'm going with this is that every group's a little dissatisfied, it sounds like. It sounds like some are maybe more dissatisfied than others, but I've always heard that a good compromise or a good settlement is one where everyone's a little bit ticked off. That may be where we are. I'm not sure. I know that that the group that I'm here representing, your PMA, is not all that happy in some cases. We'd love to see dollars in several of the categories. We'd love to see those dollars go up, but I don't think from the city's standpoint that they're going to turn on you, and at least from the city manager's standpoint, that they're going to turn on you and put together an argument against. But I just would say that what I'm seeing is a lot of dissatisfaction. Every single category could use more money, and there's a lot of needs out there, and there's needs that we haven't even thought of yet, because as Randy continues to tell us, everything's changing. So I understand that, but I do recognize the hard work of staff trying to put something together, And with that, I'll again get out of your way, but I want to thank you for the hard work you're doing, and just echo some of the sentiments here. We'd all like to see more money, but we also understand that there's some limitations.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All right, so bring it back to the authority. What I would suggest is that we take discussion in the following order. One is we talk about vision first, and then we talk about comments on the modifications that Mr. Chittenden had outlined for Section 2.2. We then discuss the concepts that Bill Gray brought to us, beginning with whether we move to a 30-year measure, and if so, how do we feel about the allocations of funding to programs and projects, and then we discuss the policy concepts. Is that acceptable?
Well,
About what Ross talked about? I think that's...
Well, we did, okay, that could be a very quick conversation. It's fine with me.
From my perspective, that was
right,
all
but
taken care of.
others may not have.
No,
so.
I understand that.
So.
The issue I had was with Bart. I was satisfied with
Okay.
the response. Everything else that they did is fine with me.
All right, so why don't we start then with discussion of vision.
You know,
Commissioner Arner.
I tell you, I'm frustrated. I realize, Tony, and I respect you a lot, and I get you're trying to control this. You're trying to control the wrong thing right now. What we had thrown out before us, and I'm insulted by it, we got a last minute from our consultant who knows our deadlines, who gives us that none of us get to see this except for you got to see it and Julie got to see it.
Well, I got to see it about
Right.
4
Okay,
o'clock.
apologize. I thought they said both of you saw it. The point is we're being thrown this with everything that every person ever asked for. I could have done that. I'll be honest, I'm insulted by this. You're asking us to now, well, let's put that over there. We'll talk about that in a minute. We have 2 totally different plans. Every single thing on that list is fundamentally different than what we've done. So you want us to start to comment about, oh, let's talk about staff's version, and then, by the way, we have a consultant version. And the consultant version is really insulting. My staff, Andy Diller, I know is sitting in his office throwing the book at the wall. It's insulting because, first of all, we should have had an opportunity. Everybody should have been here. And then, by the way, we're supposed to make our recommendations tonight and come back on May 4th. No. You know what? I think the cities and all of us are sitting here a little frustrated. We don't have the opportunity here to actually sit down and discuss this. We have not really had discussions on each one of these items. We're always cut off. And I don't mean this to you, Don. I mean the process. This is going sideways. And I don't want to be threatened by anybody. You know what? I'm not satisfied with anything on this right now. And the fact is that we need to be thoughtful. We need to be leaders here. Leadership is being organized and presenting information that's fairly distributed to the public, fairly distributed by us, who ultimately make the decision and the recommendation. And it's not fair because you're getting a visceral reaction from me and probably everybody else in this room. I don't blame the people to stand up and say they're against this. Why? Because it's a visceral reaction to something that is last minute. This is a big deal difference. And I'm not just talking the 25 or 30 years. That's a worthy discussion, absolutely worthy. But the 15 or 16 items are on there. I could have made that list myself. I just take every single thing I've heard and throw it on there. And then, by the way, trust me, we're going to work it out. So I'd like to hear from you, Don. How would you like to take this one and deal with that? Or are we going to take the other one? We have a letter from SWAT, which you have agreed to, that has some really thoughtful comments and some language changes, and we never actually get to talk about it. So I'd like to see how can we really proceed with what we have before us. 2 different plans, 2 totally different sets of rules, and they are not similar at all. So I'd like to know how we can proceed.
Well, let's first proceed with a few other comments. Commissioner Durant.
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to do is thank our staff and consultant team for doing what we asked at the last meeting. They brought us back the version that we asked them to bring back with some, potential minor tweaks. And as those of you who were here last time know, the reason we sort of got to that point is because it really felt like after an awful lot of effort, lots of conversations both inside the boardroom here and outside, that we really weren't able to get people to make compromises that were necessary to be made to get to the kind of place where we had a measure that we felt comfortable ultimately could go to the ballot. And so it was important, and I'm the guy who made the motion, to bring back this version 2.2, so we had a starting place for real, serious, honest conversation here in the public forum that needs to actually be had. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, I want to thank our consultants for doing the follow-up work of not just ignoring what we said at the last meeting when we said, yeah, go ahead and look at what you think it would take, consultants, in order to put together a measure that you think would be something that the public would be willing to accept if, in fact, we decided to go forward with a measure. And I know there's a lot of hard work that went into that. Third thing, I think I only have 17, so don't worry. No, it's only six or seven. Third thing is recognizing the comments we've heard about the compromise that was struck here about the urban limit line. I want to thank our partners from the county and from East County for their willingness to make what felt like a good and honest compromise on the urban limit line, recognizing that there are those who don't see it for what it was intended to be. And I'm perfectly happy with the idea that we just leave the urban limit line language the way it is. But I think it behooves us to thank people when they make large strides toward compromise, particularly when they're not often well recognized. So thank you to my colleagues from the county and from my East County colleagues for that. Next thing I want to comment on is, while I recognize, as one of the speakers said, compromise is difficult, and getting to a place where we can have a compromise ultimately means everybody has to be a bit unhappy. I actually also think it's fair that we deal in fact. And so let's look at some of the facts. Some of the facts that are important here is, despite the fact that we don't perhaps have things as dedicated as some would like into individual buckets, in the version 2.2, there was something, if my math is correct, something north of about 33% of the proposed allocation that was dedicated to transit and alternative transportation, or alternative means of transportation. In the document that was presented to us tonight by our consultants, that's up to about 40%. That's $1.135 billion. That's billion with a B. It is hard for me to sit here and hear that that's not somehow considered transformative, not considered meaningful, and those sorts of things. And so for those of you who would simply oppose rather than really talk about it, work with us and collaborate, go back to your publics and ours and tell them you're willing to throw away a $1.135 billion investment in transit and alternative transportation. I don't think you want to do that. I don't think that's what we want. I think that's why the consultants came forward with the alternative document that they brought forward for us to discuss. Next point that I would make, we've talked a lot about innovation and things like that, and you saw the presentation earlier tonight about Momentum and a bunch of the other stuff that we're doing as an authority to do things that are innovative, that are transformative, that are extraordinarily meaningful for the county and for the people who rely on us to help make transit and transportation funding investments to help them move in, around, and through the county. And so, once again, it's a little hard to hear that despite all of that fantastic work and effort and collaboration with the City of Concord and the federal government and everybody else, that we're somehow not thinking creatively or innovatively. There are huge investments that we've made, and we've we've done well to leverage dollars from other people. And I think, again, the measure, as has been talked about, sort of moves a long distance there. There's over 2.25% of this measure that is earmarked specifically for innovative technology, but more than that. It's sort of rife and riddled through the rest of the line items in a number of significant ways. If you look at line items 5 and 7, the high-capacity transit improvements, the 680 corridor improvements, those will necessarily involve investments in innovative technologies and innovation. I occasionally worry, moving on to the next point, but it's related to the last one, that with all of the different studies and all of the different efforts that are funded by and operated through the authority board, and the good work of lots of people who volunteered and participated, it kind of gets ignored. Chair Tatson mentioned it earlier on with respect to the I-680 corridor investment plan. There are a ton of people who spent a lot of time looking at the possible investments along Highway 680. And what they articulated included improving transit, improving freeway, which included enhanced bus, autonomous vehicles, active traffic management, demand-responsive transit service, and a bunch of those sorts of things. So my encouragement to those of you who really don't see that there's an awful lot of this that's going on is go look at the documents that are on the authority's website. The I-680 transit investment study is right there. It was approved here in December of last year. And so those things are embedded in everything we do and everything we try to do. So the last thing I'll say is, we've talked a lot about how to increase transit usage and bus ridership and all those sorts of things, or improved headways and so on. And the reality is there's a bunch of people up here who love buses and alternative transit. A number of us have sat on the bus board before, and we've got some representatives who do today. But we don't run CCCTA, which is the bus company, County Connection, in this county or AC, thank you, AC Transit in Alameda. What we do is we allocate dollars. I'm sorry?
So,
There's a number of buses.
Okay,
there are a number of buses.
We don't run any of the buses. Okay, there's 4.
Right.
My bad. We don't run any of the 4 bus systems. What we do is allocate funds. We leave it to them to do their operations. And there's not enough money, even in this proposed measure alternative, to fund all of the operations that would be necessary in order to meet the bus needs and the transit needs or desires of our community. And if that's all we did with this, the measure would fail in any event. So we have to kind of find this balance that I think we're trying to find. And I think what the consultants have put before us is a good place for us to start the next phase of the conversation. I don't know that it's possible for us to get there by May 4th. I think there is more that has to go into discussing these things in detail, not just looking at line items and taking pot shots at them without looking at the stuff that is behind those line items and looking at the detail that's embedded in them. And so I would just encourage us to kind of do that. Look at the facts and have honest and real conversations rather than hyperbolic discourse.
So Commissioner Mitchoff and then Commissioner Hudson. And Commissioner Mitchoff, let me answer your earlier question by saying, no, we will not finish by 9.
No, I understand and I thank you. I just want to put my comments with Commissioner Durant. He's much calmer than I am in making his comments. We are elected officials. I know it's fun to come and complain and bitch at us, like you're not listening to us, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. Well, the bottom line is we are, and I don't remember which person under public comment made it, but it's like we're talking to our community and they don't support this. Well, I got to talk to your community and that community and that community and that community. So if you're only talking to your own community, you need to get out of your silo and go talk to some other communities, because Commissioner Durant is exactly right. If we want this to pass, we have to have something in it for everybody, and that means either some people get a lot of stuff and others lose. We're trying to get everybody there in order to reach a compromise. And for the lady, and I'm sorry, I don't see her, but she asked the question about, thank you for the 4%, but we need 5, and how are you going to get there? David just answered your question. He told you how we're going to get there. with all these other pots of money, it will be there. The bottom line is, and for the people that talked about jobs, I mean, all of us here want to create jobs. That's why that community development CDI, what Bill referred to, is in there, is to get jobs closer to homes so that we don't have to have, pardon me, people on the roads going long distances. I got up this morning at a normal time and left Pleasant Hill to get to San Francisco. I cannot take bus, I cannot take BART, and I'm going to the Bay Area Air Quality Management District because there's Mr. Hudson, my colleague, is luckier than I am. He has the time to get on BART and walk a mile. I don't have that luxury because I had to get back to another meeting, and we're hoping by the move it will get closer to transit, but I got to take a car. So that's just the way it is, and you know, I get tired. I represent people, we all represent people who have to be in a single occupancy vehicle to get where they're going to do their business. It's the way it is. It may still be that way in 30 years. I don't know what it's going to look like in 30 years. I see this plan as trying to lay groundwork for us to get there, and there's a lot of things in this. I will go through. I do want to thank our consultants. They did exactly what we asked them to do. And there's a lot of here. We may, especially since EPAC is meeting on Friday, we may wish to wait till they have some input. And I'm sorry, I went back. On the jobs issue, you know, this, again, is a transportation measure. It is not a land use measure, and it is not a jobs creating measure. Government cannot create jobs. What government can do is create environments where the private sector and or public sector can come in to create jobs. So that's how this helps. Sitting down and having a conversation about what jobs are going to look like in 30 years, it boggles my mind. Let's have that conversation, but not in the context of a transportation plan. Thank you, consultants. I'm not sure on number 10. I went back and looked at it, and thank you for those who we were willing to compromise. We were willing to meet there. So we're going to take away the 5-year period. It's interesting that that didn't resonate with our friends in the environmental community, but fine if we take it away. I wanted to ask Mr. Durant, you were saying just go back to the original ULL and not do anything, or which is fine with me.
I meant just the Measure J language.
The Measure J language.
It's the it ain't broke,
That's
don't
fine
fix it
with
problem.
me. I haven't talked to my colleague, but I'll let him speak for myself. Again, the number 12, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a broken record here. I get that it's disclosure items and not requirements, but my concern is if you put them in as disclosure items, when they go to do that checklist and it's not checked off, that when this authority or future members on this authority have to take up funding items, there will be complaints that, well, they don't have this, they don't have this, they don't have this. It's public. I don't think we need to put it on there. I support going to a 30-year plan instead of a 25-year plan. And I think that's all my notes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Where are my notes here? Commissioner Hudson, then Commissioner Buck.
I'd like to stay with 15 and 16 and not go over the same area we've been discussing. A lot of people got up and spoke about bicycles tonight. They're not getting the money. They're not going to support the project or the bill. The issue is, if you look at 15, it was $67 million, with a third of the money going to East Bay Regional Park District, roughly $22 million. If instead of raising the total to $115 million, with East Bay Regional Park District getting a third, if you left East Bay Regional Park District at $22 million, the bike community would get $93 million, roughly 3 times what my city will get in return to source money. So if they want to cut within themselves, which I didn't hear tonight, I mean, I'm game. I'll listen to it. But that's more money than anybody else is getting. And still, East Bay Regional Park District, if you raise this up here, is going to get more money than my city will get to return to source. 16, Community Development Transportation Program, you virtually cut it, well, not quite in half, but cut it out quite a bit, and I've been one that's been lobbying for it. We had somebody from labor get up and speak tonight. I want to read this and tell me if this is anti-labor. Funds from this category will be used to implement this new Community Development Transportation Program, administered by the RTPCs. Funds will be allocated on a competitive basis to transportation projects or programs that promote economic development, job creation, and/or housing within established or planned, like PDAs, transit-supported community centers. I don't see where that's a problem so far, but project sponsors must demonstrate that at least 20% of the project is funded from other than local transportation sales tax revenue. So you're leveraging money you get through here. And the authority will prioritize funding to projects that demonstrate over 50% funding from other sources. Additional priority will be given to projects where the sponsor can demonstrate that a project supports and facilitates development of housing for all income levels. I don't know why you want to cut this, but I mean, I'm not going to kill this whole thing because of this. And I don't know about the rest of you, but we started on this in 2013. I have no desire to go to 18 or 20. If we can't do this, and we've gathered all this information now, it can't be done unless we just want to advocate instead of govern.
Thank you. Commissioner Button and Commissioner Pierce.
Well, listening to the way that Commissioner Durant started off his presentation, I think he said something about, I think he was addressing the environmental community people that were here and said something like, are you willing to, the environmental and the transit community, something about, are you willing to sacrifice $1 billion of money for transit and bikes and so on and so forth in order to oppose this and perhaps make sure it doesn't pass. And, you know, you could turn that around. I mean, I think that there's sort of a game of chicken going on here, because you could turn it around and say, are you willing to give up $1 billion of street and road improvements because you won't budge on additional investments in bikes and trails and transit and walkable communities and so on and so forth. So I guess one thing I had hoped would happen by now, and apparently it hasn't, and that is the evolution of some version of this that would be accepted by the community we see here, representing the people from Sierra Club and Save Mount Diablo and so forth. So we could look at it and say, can we live with this? If we make these changes and they're willing to accept it, then is that something that we can live with? Is it still going to get enough public support to pass? And if so, maybe that's what we ought to be looking at. But what I see us doing is going down a road where the vast majority of us support one version of the plan, and you've got a whole community out there that's saying, no, it's not good enough, and that's where we are. There doesn't seem to be any effort to find that middle ground. And I don't know if it exists, but it's something I would like to see. I would like to see what does that middle ground look like, and is it something that we could get on board with?
Okay. Commissioner Pierce, and then I'd like to make a few comments, and then Commissioner Abelson.
Thank you. First, I'd really like to thank the staff and the consultants for trying to consolidate, or for doing this consolidation of comments that we've all been putting in over the last several months. There have been a lot of comments coming from a lot of different directions, and it's not easy to try to find a middle ground, but I think the job that has been presented tonight has been admirable, and I am frankly very much looking forward to getting on with the next item on the agenda and directing them to go back and try to put together a version that is understandable to most of our public, and to coming back with that in a different format for us for our next meeting, and then point out that according to the calendar, as I understood it at least, we're going to have 3 meetings before we decide whether that's the final version and circulate it out to our cities and our RTPCs and all the advocacy groups. So I do also think that the 30-year plan helps to balance out a lot of the priorities that were, I will say, skimped on in some ways, and in other ways to help us to reach the goals that we all set forward a long time ago in that vision that we adopted. As far as the allocations between projects and programs, I think they are inextricably linked. Clearly, we can't put buses on roads that are not adequate. We cannot accommodate the growth in our population over the next 30 years without making sure that the existing infrastructure is sufficient to handle the traffic that will be coming. Even though we may reduce vehicle miles traveled for every single one of us, we're going to have a lot more people. And that means there are going to be more people trying to get places. Many of us, as senior citizens, are going to need to travel in something other than single occupant vehicles. And so we need a way to get there. But I want to go back to remember the things that the public told us in the initial polls that we did that were important to them. They wanted BART. That was number one. They wanted BART. They wanted traffic smoothing. They wanted to be able to get through congestion and get where they needed to go. They wanted the 680 corridor improved. Well, you got to improve the 680 corridor if you're going to put buses on it. And frankly, we can't put BART on it. We know that. So if we're going to put buses on it or even better carpool management in express lanes, we're going to have to fix that road. We've got some major interchanges that need some work to be safe and to be far more efficient. So we've got to put money into infrastructure if we expect everyone, cars, buses, everything, to be able to get through. And frankly, there is technology built into every single one of these categories because we cannot build our way out of the congestion. Technology is going to have to be part of what helps. The way I read this, bicycles are included in damn near every category in this thing. And I get really irritated when I am told that we're not thinking enough about everyone because frankly, we are all required to comply with complete streets. We do the best we can. There is money in here to help us do better if we have the land. I think we're all committed to that. I haven't heard a single person here that doesn't say they want to do complete streets. And we're going to do that through one category or another. It comes out under local streets and roads maintenance. It comes out through the complete streets and major street stuff. It comes out through the bike ped. It comes out through the community development transportation program to improve access. So I'm not seeing things quite as bleakly as others seem to be doing. I think, one of the things we talked about at our RTPC, and there was virtually no one there but us to hear it, was we were talking about trying to put together a school bus program in Central County. We're trying, people, but there's not enough money to do it all. And so I think David is absolutely right. There's a lot of these categories that look like they are generic. They're not. They've got nuts and bolts and real projects behind them that we've been dreaming about for years and years and years. The 684 interchange I have been fighting for 25 years to get those lanes widened and get that thing improved. And it looks like we may finally be starting to get the money to do that. That's essential for safety of our traveling public, whether they're in buses or cars or whatever they're traveling in. It's just, there's not enough money to do it all. This is a transportation measure. As many of you know, I'm the president of ABAG, and I spend a lot of my time at ABAG trying to figure out how we're going to get better housing, how we're going to get improvements in open space, how we're going to do more for jobs. That's a regional issue. We're trying to facilitate it through this plan, but we can't do the whole lift. by ourselves. We've got to have the roads and the infrastructure here in this county, and we got to have money to run the programs that use those.
I'll talk for a few minutes, then Commissioner Abelson. So I also wanted to thank staff and the consultants and everyone who spoke this evening. I would say that if I were many of the public speakers, I would have certainly said the same thing they have, because we're getting close to publishing something. They're not getting everything they want. Makes sense to say we're not going to participate. So I don't take any umbrage at that. It's just the way things are.
You and I are different then, thank you.
Right.
You're a nicer person.
I don't know if I'm nicer, I'm just different. I think with regards to what we heard from the staff report, what we heard from the consultant, I agree with Commissioner Durant that we directed staff to make refinements in the last version that we had, and we also asked the consultants to go back and say, in their perspective, what changes should we consider to increase the likelihood of this passing? I think they've done that. The fact that it's a set of things we've heard before is sort of, to me, more good news than bad news. There are things that we, for the most part, have discussed before. We chose not to do. They have come back to us and said, there is a risk if you choose not to do those. We want to make you aware of that. That's a fair comment. I welcome it. I think we should consider it. And I'm not supportive of everything that they've listed, but I'm supportive of us certainly talking about them. I do support the idea of moving to a 30-year measure. I think for my particular region, the reallocations make sense. Let the other people speak for their regions. I think that a number of the program ideas are interesting. I think the idea of combining, if we've received all these comments that transportation for livable cities isn't working, even though we haven't had many rounds of grant cycles to know whether it's working. But okay, fine, let's accept that feedback. And since we teamed to support a more robust sort of development jobs, housing development program, we can move the money into that with voter approval. And then let's come up with a more robust set of measures that we think will result in the outcomes that we've said in this room we want. I think the ULL issues we got into because we were asked to. My personal sense is that there is some inconsistency in what different jurisdictions do, so I would support having a consistent approach. The whole issue of whether you cap the number of adjustments per jurisdiction was simply designed to be a compromise. If nobody appreciates it as a compromise, take it out. There are a number of other issues, but I think, to some extent, I think that what Mr. Gray has done and what Ross have done is to give us a potential wake-up call. We ought to heed it. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it. We may think they've overreacted, but I think it warrants discussion. And our next speaker was Commissioner Abelson, followed by Commissioner Glover.
Thank you. I've been pretty frustrated by the process this round. I was around during Measure J, and the thing I remember about Measure J is the overwhelming aspect of it that I thought brought it together was that we didn't all have to be alike. We could have it be, we could say, I'm different than you are, but that's okay. And we can put money in my region in one pot and money in your region in another pot. And I think that was a really good approach, because the reality is our regions are not all alike. And if you take a region like mine, where we've got an immense amount of traffic on the streets everywhere, I think quite often we're number one in terms of the worst traffic in the whole Bay Area with I-80. We need different solutions than somebody does, if I could use you, Bob, as an example, in Brentwood. And I think it's okay to be different, and people can choose, a lot of times at least, where they live. Sometimes they can't because of money or whatever, but they can choose where they live. But I don't feel like this round that we've been so tolerant of those differences, saying, okay, you do what you want to do, and we'll do what we want to do, and we'll add it all up, and we'll have a measure. And some things, by the way, we all want to do the same thing. That's, to me, what's been the most frustrating thing. And I have to tell you that the thing about buses as a symbol is the most frustrating of all, because in my region, buses are really important, and we can't even call a category buses. We've got to call it this other thing that no one who lives in my region will know what other, whatever the word, non-rail transit is. They know what a bus is. They can vote for a bus, but they can't vote for another non-rail transit because they don't have a clue what that is. It's not going to have any meaning. And if somebody else doesn't want a bus, I'm not saying someone else has to have a bus. I'm saying we want a bus. That's how we get around in my area, in addition to BART. It's how, I bet I took a bus 5 or 6 times today when I went, because I had a bunch of places I had to go. And the bus got me there, and it got me there pretty fast because there's a lot of buses in my area. But I recognize that if I go to a different area, it's not the same, and that's okay. So if we were to do anything with what we're doing, what I would say is we ought to have more tolerance. The people who come up time and time again, the people who mostly are bike riders by the number of people who come up here, I really do get what you're saying. I don't know where you are in the audience, but I do. I'll never be one of the bike riders, but that's okay. I don't have to be doing it myself. But I see bikes as a really viable way to get around some places. In my area, we love bike riders. We love people who are willing to take themselves out of a car and get on a bike and get to where they want to go. It's good for the environment. It enables us to have more space. We've got a whole plan for putting bike lanes, protected bike lanes, as part of our complete street on San Pablo Avenue in my city. We love the complete streets plan in my city. We passed a variety of pieces of various things on our council to support that. But I know that not everyone is like us, and that's okay. So I wish that what we could do moving forward is just acknowledge that we can all be different, that it's okay to be different, and have tolerance for that difference. And if we could have a pass where we just said, okay, if you were to get in your region, which everybody here is more of an expert in some region than in other regions, if you could just say, okay, how would you change this plan, the expenditure plan, if you wanted to make it more palatable for your region? And we'd get I assume if we did that, we would get different answers for each region. And I actually think that that is okay. And I wish that we would do it. I actually like what Bill did, Bill Gray. Thank you, Bill, for looking at it, because I think that what you did was to try to get us through the process in a way that enables us to move forward with the measure. I think it was really helpful. And then on another note, I have a question, almost issue, concern, I don't know. We've been talking a lot today at the beginning of our meeting about technology, and I think that what Randy and his team is doing with technology is fantastic. but I don't see much of a mention of it in this measure. And I'm wondering if there ought not to be more of a, calling out of that technology and the various things that we could do with that technology, and as a way to attract voters, because I don't really see it. Like if I look on items 1 through 20, there was there's number 17, innovative transportation technology. It hardly has any money in it. So it doesn't really look like we're doing very much. It doesn't look like it's the highlight of what we do, but I think it ought to have a bigger place, because I think it's the most exciting thing that this agency is doing right now. I think we should be proud of what that is, and I don't think this plan really truly acknowledges that. That's the end of what I have to say. Thank you.
Commissioner Glover and then Commissioner Romick.
I want to thank the staff for your outstanding work and our consultants for the work that you've done. My comments last week was to go out and bring back something that would sell to the voters. And I think that you've done that work and in many ways have had to make a lot of tough compromises with the various interests. We must remember that this is a transportation measure. So many times we get yanked and pulled by the other interests that are out there to satisfy the needs that they have, and I understand those needs. But we must first observe what our responsibility are when you are taking on a measure that is supposed to be transportation. You must deliver transportation projects. The public often wants to know what has happened to all the money that we are paying into a system, and that they're not seeing the results. Now, I understand that the various interests need money for those programs that they're doing, but we don't spend enough time educating the public in terms of where their dollar is totally going. And we have to remember that this is a transportation measure. And we're accountable to making sure that the public understands that in order to pass these measures, that we're being handcuffed in many ways by the other interests and trying to make sure that we accommodate the needs that they have. So I think that the job that's been done has been a good job. The consultants have done exactly what was asked of them. And so when I look at the list of things that are here, I really appreciate the comments that came from City Manager of Pittsburgh, Mr. Sobrante. I don't get what I want in all this. I don't get everything that I want in all this. Yet there are many pieces that gives me a sliver of it and a good taste, but I'm not full. We don't get it all. And so we take our opportunities to try to deliver what we can, set priorities around those things, and make them happen so that we have something that when the public starts to look, they can say, that's what's important. So we got to go back and look at the polling information in terms of what they initially said was important to them, and we have to deliver on those things. So I'm looking forward to moving forward with this. Very interested in what the consultants says that is next and what they need from us so that we can give them that direction and they could go out there and continue to package this in a way that it will have good results. I'm not into putting any delays on this, 2018 or 2020. We need to move forward. A lot of work has been done. A lot of compromise has been made. We are the board that has to make these determinations. And it's unfortunate that we have individuals that are included within these packages that will sit and say that we won't support it if I don't get half of the pie or sliver of, bigger than a sliver of the pie when everyone else is getting a sliver. So I appreciate them. I appreciate the comments. I understand their needs. But as a transportation measure, we're not getting all that we need for transportation either. So I will just say that I'm willing to accept the report that has come from the consultant group and staff, and look for them in talking through what the next step should be and where we go from here and what they need from this body to move forward. And if we need a motion to do that.
Well, I have some other speakers first, if I can
okay.
take them.
That's right.
Commissioner Romick and then Commissioner Taylor.
I can be real quick and just say ditto, but I can't be that fast. Commissioner Abelson was on spot with her comment that we're not all the same. And you're exactly right. As I stated before here a number of times, East County is building the vast majority of affordable market rate homes for all of us out here. This is where everyone's living. Everyone's moving to East County because that's where they can afford to live. We're also building probably, I think all four of our communities are ahead of our numbers on affordable housing. So we're also providing not only market rate housing, we're providing affordable housing out there. The big thing that we are missing out there is jobs. One of the complaints I keep hearing, this is not transformational. Well, it all depends on who you are and where you're at. If you live in Byron and we provide them with a route around their downtown for truck traffic, for them that's transformational. If I'm able to create a road, another route out of East County instead of up and down Highway 4 that brings jobs and industry to East County, that's transformational. I mean, for me, opening up the connector routes is transformational because the traffic now no longer is going through downtown Oakley, going behind my house as it races up and down Empire. It's now on the freeway where it belongs, and so we're able to take the traffic, the tie-ups and the backups, and we're able to leave that is transformational. So, like I say, it all depends who you are, what you are, and what you're expecting to get out of it. As Mr. Sobrani said, we're all really concerned about return to source. I would like to see it much higher. I mean, we are converting from a somewhat rural a town to a more suburban environment, and going back and fixing all those roads that were never built with curb, gutter, and sidewalk is expensive and has to be able to do that. And for the bikers out there, as I've said before, and as Commissioner Pierce mentioned, there's a lot of money out there. We're building all these brand new roads that are going to be required to meet the complete streets requirements. So there's going to be curb, gutter, sidewalk, and bike lanes, and a whole lot of what we do. And as we go through and as we redo the roads, the old country roads through there that were kind of dangerous to drive on, let alone ride a bike on, we're converting those to and adding curb, gutter, sidewalks, and bike lanes. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing out there, I think, through all of East County to meet the needs of all of our diverse riders and transportation users. Lastly, I'll just say I think it's a great idea to go 30 years, and so we can help expand it. Once again, thanks staff and the consultants for attempting to reach some sort of compromise and help us bring us back and work on some issues that we asked you to do in our last meeting. And now I'll just say ditto again for everyone else's comments, and we'll move on to Mr. Taylor.
Okay. Commissioner Taylor.
Well, I guess when we first started this process, I'm studying with Julie Pierce, and she goes, well, I was on the last time we did it, and we're going to do a transportation. We're going to try to pass an initiative. And I go, piece of cake. Boy, did I not know what I was saying. And then I guess I got very, very confused when I found out if it's transportation, my vision was transportation. And then we seem to move on to pretty much the environment, transportation. My gosh, we covered things that I didn't even know were a part of transportation. And I'm not saying it was all bad. I've gone through a tremendous learning device. I agree with Janet. In fact, I probably agree with pretty much everybody that's sitting up here. We all have different views. Our cities are very diverse, we're not a backward area in East County, but we're trying to catch up, and that's very hard. Like somebody made a comment, and I won't say who that person was, that I made a comment, we spent $1 million here. This person said, heck, I spent that money last afternoon getting this done. Well, for us, that's a big deal. And what I'm just trying to say is that, you know what, some of this I'm very excited about because it's going to help East County. But it's also going to help us move through other jurisdictions for our people to come through. We're all going to go through, Janet, we're going to go through I-80. I got people that go to work every morning through there. And
Slowly.
well, they leave very early in the morning. Yeah. But I want to say this. I appreciate staff. I appreciate the Mr. Gray Bowden. I appreciate everybody here. This is not easy, and making the decisions is not easy. But guess what? The public elected us, and they expect us to make hard decisions because that's why we're here. They're not here, and they expect us to make the right decisions for the entire area, not just Bob Taylor's area, not just Clayton, but just for everyone. So I want to thank everybody that's involved, and we need to proceed.
Yeah, a couple of comments. One, like everybody else, I want to thank staff and the consultants. I may not agree with everything they say, but there is no question that they're working very hard. I don't want to know how many hours they spend here, but it's probably more than they get paid for, and they're trying real hard. But let me make an overall question, responding mainly to Supervisor Glover. I think you misunderstand what some of the critics are saying. This is not just a question of there's a pie and I want to get more of it, which means other people get less of it. I think the question that Mayor Budd has raised a number of times and the Sierra Club raised in their letters is that there have been some fundamental changes at a statewide level rolling down onto us with SB 375, with Sandag, and I completely disagree with the reading that the Sandag engineers have of the Sandag District Court opinion. But it's a question of what are we trying to accomplish? And the Caltrans 2040 has all these figures about how do we double transit usage, how do we triple bicycle usage, and having that overall perspective and then having that try to determine and provide performance metrics, I think that's what they're talking about. It involves moving some money around, but I think it involves a lot more than that.
I clearly understand. I don't think anyone understands it any better than me, what has taken place at the state level and what the obligations are. But at the same time, I think that we have to be responsible to the efforts that are put forward. And as long as we're meeting the needs for those other interests, that they should clearly understand what the true obligation of this particular board is, this body is, and that's to deliver the transportation projects and at the same time meet the needs that the state has set forward, and hopefully those meet up with their issues and concerns are. It's a balance. It's how do you balance it?
Okay, Commissioner Durant, Commissioner Arnerich, and Commissioner Hudson.
Thanks. I have an odd question that I'm going to phrase in the form of a statement, which is, while I understand what Commissioner Peoples said and what Commissioner Butt said before, it may simply be that we're talking in terms of optics versus reality. Because the real reality is that complying with the state mandates and having it trickle down is filtered through every single one of these categories, right? Every time we put money into complete streets, we're working hard to try to meet the state mandates, but it doesn't get counted in the 5% that the bike folks are demanding. And you've heard me say this over and over again. The 5% is in here. So adding a separate bucket at 5% is just adding to what's already here. Now, we could take it out of complete streets, which in one measure, one means hurts the very thing that we're trying to help. And I'm not suggesting we do that. And part of what I was trying to get at earlier, though it didn't sound like it was appreciated by Commissioner Butt, was that I think that what the consultants have come up with is a good faith compromise that is a good foundation for us moving forward. And so to hear you, Commissioner Butt, say that you're not hearing compromise from up here is just really not true. We've been trying to compromise and trying to find avenues of compromise for months. It may not be enough compromise from where certain folks sit, and that's fair and legitimate. But I think that if the issue is the optics of not having the right words in the descriptors that make clear that so much of what's involved here is about greenhouse gas, is about reducing vehicle miles traveled, right, and all those other wonderful transportation things that we're supposed to be doing, then maybe we need to play with the words and make them sell better. But that's really the truth of what's embedded in here. The second thing I think that's a challenge, and I get it, given what I do for my day job, the notion that that everything has to be measured in order for you to be able to show that it was effective. But I'll also say, I think I've said it in here before, that with my nonprofit hat on and some of the stuff I do in the other side of the tunnel around violence prevention, measuring prevention is impossible, right? You try it. Every organization that's a nonprofit that tries to deal with violence prevention and every other kind of prevention tries hard and spends lots of money trying to find ways to measure that which is virtually impossible to measure. So I have no problem with the idea of performance measures. What I don't want is them for those to be so prescriptive that they eliminate our ability to meet the diverse needs of the county, to be unbalanced in terms of how we create winners and losers so that money ends up being diverted to sort of special projects and special areas when that's not really the intention. One of the things we talked about, for example, with some of the funds that we were considering for, awards that would be competitive, focus those on PDAs, right? Now, that didn't get viewed as a compromise, didn't get viewed as an accommodation, but I've said it more than once in here, and the reality is we've all gone through the process of creating PDAs. We've all gone through the process of looking for ways to fund development in those PDAs, in some instances where our own communities are not supportive of the idea, and having buckets of funds that can be used in targeted fashions like that without having prescriptive requirements actually serves the very kind of need that Commissioner Abelson's talking about for recognizing the diversity in the county. I don't know that you want a chart that is so darn specific about what can happen in each subregion that you kill the measure in other subregions because you got people who are going to oppose it over here if they think it's only for the thing that West County wants. That's why the whole issue on the bus versus bus non-rail. The people in my area, I can tell you, if you turn that thing from bus and non-rail into just bus, you've lost about a perhaps double-digit support when that's not necessary. Now, I'm perfectly happy to have West County have something that says in their region bus and non-rail means bus only. God love them, go for it. But for those of us where we can't get to 5-minute headways, investing in buses, you're just going to piss off the voters. They're just not going to do it. And so saying that we're going to dedicate that solely to bus and not think about over a 30-year span what other options are available that might meet the needs of Central County and South County and East County, to me that's just not smart either. And so I'm trying to get us to a place where we keep it more general with some criteria, some specifics, but then allow for the subregions to identify what's really going to work there, all of it informed by what our consultants are telling us and what our polling is telling us will make it so this thing can pass if we're really going to do it. Anyway.
Okay, Commissioner Arnerich, and then Commissioner Hudson. And then I was going to take another shot. Go ahead.
First of all, I agree with 95% of everything that I've heard from everybody. Maybe not that 5% over there. I did. Sorry, I don't think anybody else did. But that aside, what really bothers all of us is we've had the longest gap between our meetings, between our last meeting and now, right? Plus 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 days. I can understand the organizations that are on EPAC and stuff. They're mostly volunteer organizations. They are struggling to get documents to it. I don't find it acceptable, Bill, to get this day. This should have been here with our packet. We have public deadlines. Our staff meets our deadlines. Our consultants need. We're paying a lot of money. So unacceptable. Don't do that again. However, and I agree with what Clover said, you did exactly what we asked for. And I don't have a problem with that. The visceral reaction is that we need to be, as an agency, we are one of the best agencies around, and we need to respect everybody's time. What this did by coming in today, it put all the RTCPs that did all the work on the whole package that we had out the window. They wasted their time because we now have a new set of rules that they need to go through, and part of our job, and all of us, I represent cities, we got to keep everybody in this. And while we have people in the audience, and I respect them, you know what? The people that spoke here tonight represent about 4 groups out of hundreds that we're trying to keep into this and make sure that we're satisfying. And that's the message I hear from all of us. We realize our constituencies are huge. But as an organization, we need to stay on track, and we need to meet our own deadlines and not have any reason not to do that. And that's to be fair of everybody's time. I agree with what's there. I'm concerned on that list for us to be making comments on that and send them away and say, go work it out. We all need to spend some time reading this. I've been reading it while we've been listening, but trying to listen. I think in all fairness, I don't want to be asking them to go off again and do something without us having a thoughtful discussion with our own experience and not at late hours to go through that and say, you know what, that wordsmithing, it really gets down to it. Because what I hear from everybody is I think, and I agree, I think the 30-year solves a lot of issues. And it gets, I went back and looked at what our environmentalists proposed in dollars and cents. I looked at what our other folks, and I think Bill and our team has done a great job coming up with a way to get to that. It does get down to the words, but that list there, that's a long laundry list. We've heard them all. And we sort of in and out wait on those. We need to really be thoughtful, and our local RTCPs have given us really detailed information on each one of those categories. And we need to figure out how to go back to them and get a consensus of what we agree. So we as a board can say, you know what, here's where we think we need to go. And I think they've done exactly what we asked them. But I don't think we can tell them, go back and go fix this now and solve it, because I think we need to listen, go back to our own staff, hear from them. None of our staff has seen this. Not one of them has seen them. Even the PMA, they only saw it tonight for a few minutes. So I think we got here. Let's just be mindful and respectful of the public and getting our documents out on time. And I think it helps us as commissioners, too, so we can be intelligent and respond well.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but when you make a statement, SB 375, and you don't think we understand it, or the public who spoke tonight doesn't think we understand it, that's the legislation that led to the Sustainable Community Strategy. I mean, that's one Bay Area. There are 5 members here on MTC and or ABEC, 6 if you want to consider a former one. And to me, when we look at number 16, which was that community development, whatever, and it specifically mentions planned development areas, and nobody seemed to care that much about it, I think it might be the other way around. I think we get it. I'm not so sure some of the people that thought that wasn't important don't get it, but I'm willing to let it go because everything I see on here works towards what I'm seeing in the review so far or what I've seen in Plan B. We know where we have to improve. I know it's getting a little late, so before I forget, and I'm old, I want to bring this up. There is something that I do believe that is important when you're talking about that same sustainable community strategy, has to do with the maintenance of effort. So before I forget about it, there is a last bullet that was added at SWAT that I think needs to be in there, and that you don't penalize the people that have been kicking in their general fund money to get the roads up there as long as they're holding a PCI of 70. That should be another alternative. So in case I forget later on when we adjourn and 3 in the morning, I don't want to wake up like Don does and know that I only have 2 hours before I got to get up and talk to Randy.
Commissioner Pierce, and then I'll post it.
Yeah, just really quickly. I have to respectfully disagree a little bit with Newell, and I share your frustration at getting it handed to us this evening, because while I think a lot of us have talked conceptually about what's here tonight, I hadn't seen it either. It was new to me. But it does reflect what we've all been talking about. And frankly, I think it reflects what at least our RTPC has said from what the letters we've had from the RTPCs in their reports. I think most of that's incorporated in here. So I think, yes, our RTPs are going to see it again, but I don't know that we have to hold up the next step in the process until it gets reviewed yet one more time, because it's going to go back to them and to the cities again before we get our final shot at it in the middle of July.
So let me float something out and see whether anybody thinks it's an okay idea, which is, given a combination of what we've heard and to some extent what we haven't heard, which is not too many complaints about many of the suggestions, obviously some, category 12, for example. One option is that we could ask the consultants to go ahead and work on an updated draft for our May 4th meeting, recognizing you will get it to us at least the Friday before, and to incorporate these points. A couple of personal comments. I think that on item 9, which is the performance criteria, and item policy 9.9 and 0.7, the CDI program, that I think while I understand that we may not finish those until a year after the measure is adopted, I think it might help deal with some potential opposition if we laid out some more policy direction in a potential measure. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But I'm wondering if there's sort of just concurrence to move with that. Because the other option is to then either go through these items in more detail this evening, which we can do, or have another meeting between now and the 4th, and we're going to try to come close to our schedule. I don't know if silence implies consent or what.
I think either of those options is fine. Meaning I think we can still spend a little bit more time tonight if people have the energy for it. I don't know that we get through all of this before the end of the night, and so I know the time. I think that's why they moved me over here so I can actually see the clock now.
Julie has to hold a meeting tomorrow as president-elect of the general session, and that includes all of our cities and counties.
Okay, so now you heard what you wanted, which is some people don't want to continue tonight, which is fine. I think having another meeting is a good idea. I do think we need to spend a little bit more time with each of these categories. I have concerns about one in particular, and we're not going to talk about it tonight. We shouldn't, so I'll save it for next time. But again, I think we're on the right path to having discussion about these items. So maybe another meeting is really the right answer.
And if I could, I want to speak for the staff too. They've got the Gomena Symposium tomorrow, where they're welcoming people at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Very good.
Are you staying overnight here?
Yeah. Ross?
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of clarify again what we're really laying out here. And I think we want to be respectful that what we bring back is thoughtful and response to your requests. So in terms of an additional meeting, we'd probably have to pretty much work off the material we have right now. So the alternative would be, we have the deadline Friday for comments on the draft 2.2. We have some comments we got tonight on the BART language and other things. And then we have a commitment for reformatted TEP, and then incorporation of these things. We could bring back a draft May 4th that has everything, highlights the changes, and really would still give you the chance to go through these one by one, really in context of a whole package. SWAT letter, and we're going to get comments from WICTAC on Friday. We're going to get comments from EPAC on Friday. So we'd be able to come back with the perspective of all the comments that we've received in a complete packet instead of looking at certain things in isolation. So we could not turn that around for a meeting next week, but we could turn it around for a meeting in 2 weeks.
Commissioner Abelson.
I was just wondering if we couldn't have a little more wording about technology and about the desirability of, some of the things that we could, not so much what it is, but more what we could accomplish, what it could mean, the positive benefits of it.
And I think that's something that'll come out in the redraft, because I agree with Commissioner Duran. The technology's in here. We just don't use the word technology in every category, but 2/3 of the categories, we're not going to accomplish what we're saying here without the use of technology. So
right, and I don't need the word. What I guess I want to see is that it's
more obvious.
One of the examples that I think is just fantastic is the idea of using driverless cars to get people to and from the BART station, say in the hills. That would be so fantastic in a city like mine that's full of these hills that buses will never run there.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great. So just mentioning things like that, I think could inspire people to support help to inspire people to support the measure.
And that's what I don't want to move on to the next item, but when we get into the next item, I think we could talk a little bit about how the reformat would do that. Right now, BART, we talk about last mile. Well, last mile today versus last mile 10 years from now versus 20 years from now will be different based on the technology that you have at that point in time.
All right, so I am sensing a majority, at least a majority opinion to continue to our meeting on the 4th. I think just strong encouragement to get a report at least the Friday before, so we all have a chance to read it and digest it.
Let's go past strong encouragement and just say,
Okay.
in whatever state it's in, it goes in the packet on the Friday before.
Okay, thank you. And I would also encourage, our many people who have come in and commented this evening to come back on some of the proposals that have come up this evening and comment on them more specifically. I like this, I don't like that. This is still missing. We've heard some of that tonight, but you folks just saw it for the first time as well in some cases. So I think we're happy. So we have very quickly item 1.3. Sorry.
What about it?
Well,
It has to wait till after the May 4th meeting.
well, no, because I think it's going to affect how they write it. It's a formatting issue.
Yeah, so real simple, or I'll start out real quick and Bill can jump in as well. We've had Measure C, Measure J, and similar formats, been successful. We're showing an alternate format or an option with the Measure BB. Staff would recommend we go towards that option more. It's probably a little friendlier to look at. You have pictures and graphs and so forth.
So moved.
Well, hang on. I've had a request for comment, not quite that fast. Okay, I think we got the staff recommendation. Commissioner Pierce.
I will second the motion because, and not to be flip about it, and I know you weren't, but I really like the way that the Measure B was grouped sort of by category. That shows all of those bike ped kids, seniors, all those other things in one category. So you can see how they build upon each other and they're interrelated. That's not to say that the local streets and roads doesn't have some of that in it too, but there will be cross comparisons, I'm sure, drawn in the language. But I really like the fact that that graphically brings those things together. And so, if it's a combination of where we were and what that is, that's great too, but I like that graphic representation. I think it's easier for the public.
And I think just to Commissioner Abelson's comment, we could just put in a sidebar on technology that's an umbrella.
Permeates.
Okay, so there's been a motion by Commissioner Durant, a second by Commissioner Pierce. Is there any further comment? What? Yeah, is there any public comment on this item? Don't see any. Okay, so all those, before we vote, I would like to say, I would like to appoint an ad hoc committee that would look at drafts solely for the purpose of commenting on whether the authority's intent is translated directly into the new format, not to weigh in with their views that we should be doing A as opposed to B. And I would like to ask Commissioners Durant, Romick, and Butt to join me in doing that. If that's acceptable to the authorities in general? Okay. All right, so vote on the measure, or on the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. And our next meeting is May 4th. Thank you. We're adjourned.
The other thing I don't like is this.
Yeah, no, that's why I like this. It's protected.
Yeah.
And it comes in different colors.
Yeah.
But I like it because.
My dad used to work for a company called Parrot Iron Corporation. And he built most of the high rises in the city.
Yeah.